What if I told you that David Bowie was supposed to release a surprise album in 2001? An album with a really interesting concept behind it. The album was recorded, mastered, and even the artwork was nearly ready. But it got buried, shelved indefinitely, and never officially saw the light of day during his lifetime. So what's the story here? Let's go through it, and if you love rock music history like me, you'll probably want to subscribe and join our pack. Towards the end of the 1990s, David Bowie was getting a bit nostalgic. For whatever reason, he started revisiting old songs of his in live shows. And I mean old songs. Songs from the 60s. Songs from before The Thin White Duke, before Ziggy Stardust. Songs that he'd released in his teens and early 20s. Songs that the majority of his fans were simply unaware of. The first old song to appear was Can't Help Thinking About Me, originally released in 1966.
I can't help thinking about me. I can't help thinking about me. Remember when we used to go to church on Sundays?
Reeves Gabrels, a prolific Bowie collaborator since '88, had suggested he revive that track when they were rehearsing for 1999's VH1 Storytellers concerts. See, Gabrels had actually bought a compilation album with that song on when he was 14 years old. It was the first he ever heard of David Bowie. I said it as a joke. David paused and he thought, and he said, "You know, that might be a good one." Next thing I knew, we were playing it.
It's the first song that I wrote and recorded as a solo artist. And it's a beautiful piece of solipsism. It's called Can't Help Thinking About Me.
The track went down well at the concert, and then other 60s songs like The London Boys and I Dig Everything began to pop up in live sets and rehearsals as well. Can't Help Thinking About Me in particular became a significant part of his sets in 1999 and 2000. Bowie had transformed it into a much more rocky version. Why was Bowie suddenly revisiting these older songs? No one really knows for sure, but it might be due to the emergence of the internet and the dedicated people on the internet who like to analyse Bowie's old songs. Songs that Bowie didn't really feel were much good. I see sites on the internet where they study those areas very intimately. You can see them picking through the peppercorns of my manure pile, looking for something that might indicate I had a future. They're few and far between, but they have come up with some nuggets. And all of this was ramping up to an interesting idea. Bowie wanted his first album in the new millennium to be a 60s album called Toy, revisiting these old nuggets, as he called them. He wanted to approach those older songs with his newfound maturity and musical abilities to see what he could do with them. Bowie specifically wanted to record the album immediately after his headline performance at Glastonbury Festival in June 2000. He and the band were in incredible form, and he wanted to capitalise on that and capture that tight live sound in this new record. He wrote this in a fan newsletter at the time. "I hate to waste the energy of a show-honed band, so I've asked one and all if they would like to make an album immediately when we get back to New York. All are in full agreement, and they'd like that very much. So I've pulled together a selection of songs from a somewhat unusual reservoir and booked time in a studio. I still get really elated by the spontaneous event and cannot wait to sit in a claustrophobic space with 7 other energetic people and sing till my tits drop off." And so that's exactly what they did. They headed straight to Sear Sound Studios in Hell's Kitchen. Bowie wanted this album recorded live and cut together quickly. It took just over 2 weeks. Bowie and the band had a great system by that point. They were tight and knew exactly how to bring Bowie's vision to life. The album featured re-recordings of songs Bowie had originally released between 1964 and 1971, and it also featured a handful of new tracks as well. In fact, the title track was written in studio, based on Simple Scale's keyboardist Mike Garson had been doing at the time. I was just practicing doing runs on the scale, and he and the rest of the band built a song from that. He must have looped it in the studio from our jam. It's also important to note that Bowie was in a great place in his life around that time. He was much healthier than he had been. He was sober, he was enjoying marriage, and he had completely shaken off quite a challenging decade where he struggled to find his place amongst modern music. Bowie's Glastonbury performance and the critical reception of the album Hours shifted the narrative, re-establishing him as a mature musician, rather than a fading icon of the 70s and 80s. Mark Platy, known for his work with Bowie in the 90s, co-produced the album with him. He was about to have a child, he killed it at Glastonbury, everything was good. It was one of those times where the stars meet and everybody is in a great place in life, and there's not one person that has an attitude, or is a prickly pear. By December 2000, the album was done and Bowie wanted to release it as a surprise album, a concept pretty much unheard of at the time. He brought it to his label, EMI/Virgin, and it's around here that things went a bit sour. See, at the time, the label was grappling with a financial crisis, fueled by the rise of file sharing, a weak global economy, and the box office failure of Mariah Carey's Glitter. Executives doubted that a Bowie album revisiting his most obscure songs would help stem the losses, so they shelved it indefinitely. While he turned his attention to his next album, Heathen, relatively quickly, Bowie wasn't happy about Toy being shelved. And it actually eventually led to his departure from EMI Virgin altogether. I've had one too many years of bumping heads with corporate structure. Many times I've not been in agreement with how things are done, and as a writer of some proliferation, frustrated at how slow and lumbering it all is. So from there he set up his own label, called ISO, which benefited from a distribution deal with Columbia. He released all his future music via this label for the rest of his career. So if you think about it, Toy was a sort of sacrifice for Bowie to realise he needed to set up this label. Despite being shelved by Virgin, EMI, the album did have a dodgy version leaked online somewhere in 2011. Some believe it was leaked via Mark Platy's stolen laptop, but that was never confirmed. Some critics argue that the album being shelved was ultimately a good thing for Bowie's career. Alexis Petridis from The Guardian makes a really interesting point. In a sense, Toy was a dead end. Bowie would finally rediscover the kind of inspiration that had powered him through the 1970s by abandoning his past rather than picking through it. His 2002 album Heathen was fresh, gripping, and highly accessible. And by his final set, Black Star, he really had reached the long-promised return to prime form. It bore almost no relation to anything he had previously attempted. It's an interesting question to ask. Had Toy been released, would it have set Bowie on a different path? Would we have seen more albums revisiting older works? Would we have ever heard Black Star? 3 songs from that album were personally selected by Bowie for his 2014 compilation album Nothing Has Changed, while the rest of the album remained in the vault. It wasn't until 2021, 5 years after Bowie's death, that the album had an official release as part of the Brilliant Adventure box set. Mark Platy was heavily involved in bringing this box set to life. It was a head trip to go back 20 years in time to this stuff. I was really taken with the joy on these tracks, and David's singing is phenomenal. If there were a shining example of the expression better late than never, this is it. The album cover for this album is, well, what the bloody hell is that? It's horrifying, isn't it? It's Bowie's face superimposed onto a baby. It looks like it was made with an old version of Microsoft Paint, doesn't it? While this might seem completely bizarre, it didn't come from nowhere. The image was in fact created by Bowie himself around the time the album was made. The original artwork, titled Renaissance Man, Self-Portrait, was a digitally manipulated image of a baby photo of David, with a more recent photograph of his face replacing his face. And in 2001, Interview magazine gave a free gift to its subscribers, a calendar featuring the image on the January page. And if you think about it, it works quite well on a symbolic level. It's Bowie's older, more mature face on his baby body. Perhaps a comment on how he was redoing his work from the 60s, the songs from his career's infancy. Very clever. And actually, if we compare it to the covers of Hours and Heathen, well, it doesn't actually look too out of place, does it? Whether or not Bowie was intending for this to be the album cover back in 2000 is unknown, but I think it works well in the 2021 release. Now, 13 years before recording Toy, David Bowie performed one of his most emotional concerts ever. In fact, it was so emotional he was in tears on stage, all because of one song in particular, Heroes. Find out all about this story in the next video.